What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Odd Shopper channel. Today, we're talking some college basketball betting. It's February the 7th, Wednesday night. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're also brought to you by BetMGM, and they have a limited time offer for those of you in legal states, with the exception of New York, Puerto Rico, and Nevada. What you'll do is click the link below, make your first deposit of at least $5. Turn that $5 around, bet it on any team, market, total, whatever you want. You will be paid $158 in the form of bonus bets. Limited time, so make sure you take advantage of this. And you need to be 21 to play in most areas. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. Circling back to yesterday quickly before we dive into today's games, and man, it's a loaded slate. We're going to talk a bunch of them today, trying to get a little bit more in the video. Went 9-3. It actually could have been better. I bought out of Rhode Island last second because they had a couple players ruled out. Didn't matter. They still covered. So cost myself an extra win in that area. And then there were a couple things that happened. Charlotte blew a big lead late in that game against USF. I think they should have won overall. They were killing them in the first half. I added South Carolina late. That ended up pushing. But otherwise, it was a pretty good showing. Got a lot of hate for taking some road teams. We'll be doing it again today, which I don't feel comfortable about. But people like to talk about how Wake Forest can't win on the road, smash Georgia Tech. And there were a couple other spots that were pretty good. Rutgers getting Williams in the fold really helped them against Maryland. They ended up winning outright. But yeah, pretty good day. And we will move forward into this slate. But where are we going to start here? I forget which game we even have up first. I'll bring you behind the glass, and I guess we'll find out together. Oh, yeah. I don't know how I could forget this. It's the best game on the card, I personally think, from a viewing perspective. Alabama versus Auburn. So huge SEC showdown. And this is one where I like a road team. I like a decent amount of road teams today, which doesn't feel great. But both these teams are awesome. You don't need me to tell you that. These are two teams that will be playing in March Madness. I still question Auburn's record. And I understand the efficiency metrics. They're awesome. You can try to schedule adjust for those, which I do. It's still tricky when you have Auburn, who hasn't played a very difficult schedule this year. I haven't updated their quad one wins and losses, but they didn't even have a quad one win earlier this month. And I'm not sure they do. Like non-con, they just played tons of cupcakes. Like they lost to Baylor in their opener, but otherwise the games that were supposed to be good for them have aged horribly. Virginia Tech's a team that's not going to make the tournament more than likely. Indiana's not going to make the tournament more than likely. USC's horrific. And I mean, those are the best teams they played in non-con. Their SEC schedule's been, it's backloaded. I mean, this team's going to end up playing a ton of tough games late. So far, they lost to Bama. Now that was on Bama's court, so at least noteworthy. And it was close, 79-75. But there are other notable wins in conference like A&M, LSU. They beat Ole Miss twice, but this team hasn't played Florida. They haven't played Kentucky. They haven't played Tennessee. You basically haven't played anyone in the top of the conference except for Bama, and you lost that game. So what are we really doing with the Auburn efficiency metrics? I'm not saying they're bad. I'm not saying they're elite. They're just tough to measure. And in my opinion, you look at the makeup of this roster, Johni Broome's awesome. The rest of the roster, I have questions with. You've got a bunch of up transfers, players that have been mediocre and have been with the team for a while, like Katie Johnson. Their freshman Aiden Holloway has effectively been benched. So, I mean, I don't know what to make of this team. Meanwhile, with Bama, we know exactly what this team is. The opposite of Auburn. They play arguably the most rigorous strength of schedule in the entire country. Their non-con is just a murderer's row of opponents. Purdue, Arizona, Creighton, Clemson, Ohio State, who's not that great, but still a good non-conference opponent and probably would top the list for what Auburn played aside from Baylor. Anyway, you see my point. We have a battle-tested Bama heading into this spot and a Bama team that's already won this game. Not to mention Bama does a lot of things really well. This team can shoot the ball, certainly better than Auburn. They're third in effective field goal percentage. Auburn is 64th. This team is getting healthier. They're bringing back Nick Pringle for this game, and while he individually is not a difference maker in my opinion, Auburn's very good inside. Johni Broome bodied this team earlier, and Bama's bigs love to foul. So getting Pringle back adds an extra body to that front court, which is going to win with numbers because Johni Broome's going to do what he does. Having one of the Bama bigs foul out and not have Pringle would be a problem. But this Alabama team, 12th in three-point rate, 17th in three-point percentage. They're going to be a little volatile because of that. They're going to live and die by the three. Auburn's fairly good at defending them. But, I mean, these are two teams that are excellent everywhere. Offense, defense, you name it, both these teams have excelled. What it comes down to for me is you're getting 5.5 points for Bama. I make this a little closer to a pick'em, so I don't even think Bama wins outright. But, man, for an Auburn team with questions on the resume, I'm not going to say they're overrated. I just think they're questions. There's a lot of points with Bama here, and one I am willing to take as a road dog in this spot. Next up, we're going to do a bunch of Big East games today. So I guess we'll start with the premier ones and then work our way down the list. This one, Creighton taking on Providence. Another one where I think there's, I don't know how to put this, resume concerns with Providence. This team lost Bryce Hopkins earlier this year, unfortunately for them, and they've been able to overcome it for the most part. What I'll say is I have significant questions with the strength of schedule. I mean, here are the wins they've had since the new year. DePaul, Georgetown, and Seton Hall, where Kadari Richmond didn't play. Otherwise, this team also lost to Seton Hall, lost to Creighton, lost to St. John's, lost to UConn, and got bodied by Villanova their last time out. A lot of these losses are pretty bad, too. Like, they lost to Xavier by 20, lost to Creighton by 9, lost to UConn by 9. That's actually pretty respectable. But the body of work has not been great for this team since they lost Bryce Hopkins. And immediately when you start handicapping and trying to build a model, you have to sort of parse their sample now that they don't have him. The roster is not deep whatsoever. And that's going to be an issue against Creighton, I think. You're basically relying on Devin Carter to do everything for you. The defense for Creighton is excellent, especially their guard play between Trey Alexander. I mean, Sharman's pretty decent himself defending the ball. It's not going to be easy for Devin Carter out there. And in the front court, this team is limited. Josh Oduro, for everything he does well, he's really the only player you can trust down there at this point. Like, Ticket Games plays more of the 3-4. He'll be ceding size certainly to the interior of Creighton. And Kalkbrenner's excellent. What Kalkbrenner does well, guy never fouls, draws a bunch himself, and he's incredibly efficient on the inside. Oduro is a player that averages 4.5 fouls per 40 minutes. We've seen him in foul trouble in 2 of their last 3 games. And if he's in foul trouble for any stretch of this time, Providence is absolutely cooked. And to talk about just what Creighton does well, this team has so many paths to beating you. They're 7th in effective field goal percentage. Providence is 1/10. This team is horrible scoring the ball, 171 in overall offensive efficiency. Creighton dominates inside. They're 3rd in 2-point percentage. They also shoot a ton of threes. They're 7th in the country in 3-point rate. That's where Providence is a little weaker on defense. And this team has amazing height. 3rd in the country in effective height. Providence 180th. And again, losing Hopkins certainly hurts them in that area. So you're going to have advantages in places like rebounding, foul margin. Basically, all those little micro advantages work in favor of this Creighton team. Not to mention, Providence has really struggled turning the ball over. That's not really Creighton's game on D, but could be an issue for them at certain points in certain matchups in this game. So I know we're hitting the road team again, but it's another situation where I'm not buying the current resume with Providence right now, given their recent body of work without Hopkins. Guess we'll stick in the Big East. Villanova taking on Xavier. This is an awesome game that might not be talked about, Nova, on the bubble at this point. Right now, you can find this all over the board. I've seen it as high as Xavier -4. You can find Xavier -3s. Just a shout out to Odd Shopper. Make sure you shop this. This is probably the most important line to shop on the entire board. But basically what Odd Shopper does is gives you all the books. You can shop them, sort by your state, find the best one for you. And this makes a huge difference. For reference, like last night, South Carolina, I got a push on a game that could have been a loss depending on the line. So it's going to save you money. Not to mention, we have packages that have consolidated all our tools, takes a market-based approach to find plus EV betting spots across sports and not just college basketball. And our Discord is now included, so you get access to all our experts breaking down games, and you can just straight up ask questions if you have anything you'd like to know about a certain pick. But that's available, $14.95 for a week, $49.95 for a month, no long-term commitments. I use it every day, and I recommend checking it out. You will not be disappointed. As far as this game goes, it's not at the top of the card. I kind of rank these by sort of excitement level. I don't know. But I do think Xavier's worth betting just towards the bottom of the card at -3. These teams are incredibly close in a lot of efficiency metrics. And I'm not sure people are actually factoring in how good Xavier is. They've played a rigorous schedule, as has Villanova, but Xavier 6th in strength of schedule, Nova 8th. Neither of these teams are particularly good shooting. Villanova 195, Xavier 219. But I trust the Xavier team a little more right now. As we've seen, Nova's played up and down to competition. Lost to Marquette, lost to Butler, lost to St. John's, lost to UConn, lost to Marquette. So in their last 6 games, they have one win. It came against Providence, who we just broke down. And I personally am not buying as a team that's really a legitimate threat in the Big East right now. Anyway, they head to Xavier, who has 3 elite guards and playing awesome basketball right now. Quincy Olivari coming off just the nuclear game this weekend, shooting 45% from 3. Desmond Claude plays more than 3. He's been excellent, especially inside. And then, of course, David McKnight shooting 37% from 3 himself, running the point for this team, rarely turning the ball over. The guard play has been awesome. And I think their interior has a little bit room for growth. Abu Usman, the guy is fouling incessantly. His foul rate, 6.8 fouls per 40 minutes, is egregious. But he is 6'10", and he plays well on the inside as long as he stays out of foul trouble. It's going to be a big question for him in this game, but you look at fouls generated. Villanova is 286 in generating fouls. This is not a team that brings their opponents to the line very often. So if you were to draw a matchup on paper for Abu Usman to reach a 28-minute ceiling, which we've seen, this would probably be the one. Cross your fingers for that. I think it's important, but it's worth noting. As far as this Nova team goes, they've been pretty bad inside, and they continue to mess with their rotation. It's almost like they're playing the hot hand. I cannot figure out what they're doing. Their best player has been Mark Armstrong, and they refuse to play him full minutes. They're still trotting out Justin Moore, who's been pathetic this year. And I don't know. He dealt with the season-ending injury. He aggravated it in this season already, missed multiple games. He's shooting 25% from 3, and he does nothing else. Loves to stand in the corner and get his cardio in. But he's been a liability on the floor for this Nova team. Their front court has also not given them much. Hakeem Hart's been benched. Tyler Burton's playing mid-25 in minutes. And even Eric Dixon's been a bit of a disappointment considering what we expected for this team. Xavier right now is 255th in interior, Xavier's 255th in interior scoring. That's a lot because Usman's fouling out, but Nova, to surprise you, would be 153. This Nova team has been terrible inside, and what Xavier maybe lacks in interior scoring, they make up for interior defense. They're 43rd in the country defending that area of the court. And then as far as three-point shooting goes, Villanova 220th, Xavier 115th, micro advantage there. Neither team really turns the ball over too much. Nova's a little bit more secure with it than Xavier, but close there. And then we already mentioned the fouls. Villanova generating almost no fouls, whereas Xavier does generate a lot. So it's a close one. Have bigger edges in the first 2 games, but I do think you can still take a position on Xavier if you're running out 8 or 9 bets like I am today. We'll move over to the Big Ten. Nebraska takes on Northwestern. This one's going to put the narrative bros in a complete mental pretzel. I'm not sure how you guys are going to handicap this because both these teams are coming off 2 straight overtime wins. You know, the fresh legs bros. They're going to be in a real pretzel. I guess the one narrative you can hang your hat on is Nebraska hits the road, and they've been bad on the road this year, as most teams have been. It's hard to play on the road. But I'll say to that, Nebraska, they have 1 win on the road. It's against Kansas State, but they have 2 overtime losses on the road. Overtime games generally can be considered close to coin flips. I mean, could be a very different story had you won those two road games in overtime. They've already played. Nebraska won 76-69. Of course, that was on their home floor. But both these teams are good, and I think they're both tournament teams from the Big Ten. As far as advantages go, you have a slight advantage on defense to Nebraska, slight advantage on offense to Northwestern. Height and rebounding is actually pretty close between these 2 teams. Some of the rebounding stuff with Northwestern and why you see them 296 is pacing related. They play really, really slow. So some of their metrics are just affected by they're not having as many possessions and chances to get rebounds. But anyway, as far as this game goes, I think the biggest advantage for Nebraska comes in their shooting. This team is shooting they're 31st in three-point rate, 50th in three-point percentage, and Northwestern is 313th at defending that area of the floor. Meanwhile, this Nebraska defense is actually pretty balanced across the board. So you have 39th interior, and you have 121st perimeter. Those are both pretty good metrics. For reference, what drives the Northwestern defense up to 93rd is they're forcing a ton of turnovers. They're 12th in turnovers forced. You actually dive into like where they allow points. They're 184th on the interior and they're 313th on the perimeter. Just overall shooting percentage allowed to their opponents. The other teams are shooting over Northwestern with ease. As far as the turnovers go, Nebraska doesn't really turn the ball over. They're 44th in turnovers committed. So yeah, Northwestern forces a lot of them, but you have a very secure Nebraska offense not turning the ball over very much at all. Meanwhile, a couple other micro edges. Northwestern, they've been in foul trouble incessantly this year, 326th in fouls committed. Some of that having already faced Purdue twice, like against Purdue, I think they shot 47 free throws or something ridiculous. But a lot of people will point to that overtime game and use it as a feather in the cap of Northwestern. I think it's shocking they got to overtime. They shot like 50% from three in order to even keep that game close. They are extremely good at shooting threes. They're 8th in the country in three-point percentage, but they don't shoot a lot of them. This is adjusted for pace. They're 185th in three-point rate. So, they don't even play to their strengths. Again, Nebraska's pretty decent at defending that. And at the end of the day, I don't even think Nebraska wins this game. This is another situation like Bama where you have two teams that are pretty even and you're getting 5.5 points, a couple possessions with the road team here because there's a narrative that they don't play well on the road. I think they'll be just fine. Both teams coming off 2 overtime games will take the Cornhuskers. Sticking with our Big Ten trend, Wisconsin takes on Michigan. This is one I'm also surprised that the line is so light. Overall, Michigan is basically a laughingstock in the Big Ten at this point. I don't know what this team is doing. And I'm not sure it's going to get any better. You look at their recent play, they've won 2 home games since December 16th. 2 home games. They used a suspension on Doug McDaniel where he only serves the suspension on road games. And they're still getting bodied at home. Efficiency metrics, basically everything in this game looks Wisconsin's direction. Offense, defense, rebounding, height. So is this enough points is the real question to me. And I don't think it is. On the interior, let's just isolate Michigan's defense for a second and see where they're weak. 112th on the interior. Okay, now you're going to have to face Tyler Wall, who's coming off an amazing game against Purdue. Couldn't quite get the win, but a very good showing. You have to face Stephen Kroll. On the perimeter, this team is 302nd in defending the three. Wisconsin does have some shooters. Max Klesmit's been an absolute flamethrower from three. Some of your bench guards are giving you good minutes. And even the front court is decent at shooting threes. Meanwhile, what does Michigan do well on offense? The answer is actually nothing. They're 112th in overall interior scoring. They've shot the three relatively well, but Wisconsin, I think, has gotten better at defending this area of the court. We talked about them in the Purdue matchup. They were outside the top 303 point percentage. I actually went back and looked at sort of Wisconsin's trends, and I'm not sure why they were so bad at defending the three earlier in the year, but they've gotten better. They've actually climbed inside the top 300, so not good, but at least trending in the right direction. Aside from that, Wisconsin plays a really big lineup. They're 14th in effective height. They have a vast rebounding advantage. They're nearly 100 spots better than Michigan in this area. And then a lot of the little stuff like turnovers forced, Wisconsin has big advantages there. Michigan is 213th in turnovers committed. I didn't actually run the Doug McDaniel versus Jalen Llewellyn. I'd be interested to see it, but at least worth noting. And then fouls generated, Wisconsin 16th. A lot of that coming through their front court. So the big guys like Kamwa and Taris Reed, who suck inside anyway, they're going to have their hands full against the Wisconsin front court. And again, Michigan has not played well at home. So those of you with the narratives, there it is. There you go. That's your answer. All right. Let's move to the ACC. We're going to talk Pittsburgh taking on NC State. This is one where I like another road team here. NC State's run pretty hot of late, and they need to be given some credit, but I don't really buy their roster. Wasn't buying it at the beginning of the year. But you look at what NC State's done. They're 4-3 in their last 7 games with some pretty good wins. They brought Virginia to overtime. That was one of their losses, so respectable. But a lot of these wins are very close. You're talking all single digits. 6-point win against Louisville. The Wake Forest win is pretty solid. Miami, not at full strength. And then Georgia Tech, who just got absolutely annihilated by Wake Forest last night. So I don't know. There's questions with this schedule. And then Pittsburgh, this team has been a little bit better of late. They're 4-1 in their last 5 games. Beat Wake Forest as well. Beat Georgia Tech. Had that win over Duke, who was not at full strength in the game. And then their only loss came to Miami, who's been a streaky team this year. But anyway, as far as stylistics in this game go, I still think there's a little bit left for Pitt, As far as like effective shooting, that suits Pitt. They're 164. NC State is 229. And I don't really think that's changing. You like look at Pitt's roster. I think they do have room to grow. You've got like young players on this team, like Jaden Lowe is a freshman. He's playing like 35 minutes a game now. Only 32% from three, but that's improving. Like Blake Hinson, he went through that weird stretch where he couldn't put the ball in the basket. He's back up to 42% from three. He's 6'8" to play in your front court. And this team does have a lot of size. Like Carlton Carrington, 6'5". Hinson, we just mentioned. Diaz Graham, 7 feet. Zach Austin, 6'7". Frederico, 6'11". It's a lot of height that NC State's going to have to contend with. And I personally think they have a pretty bad weakness in their front court. Big old DJ Burns got benched, and he should. This guy's a mid-major player at best. You're going to see size. I don't care what the effective height stuff tells you. And honestly, it's pretty telling. Pitt, 15th, NC State, 155th. I'm not really sure how NC State hangs with Pitt on the interior. As far as three-point percentage and stuff from the guards, NC State's also not very good out here. They don't shoot a lot of threes, 245th in three-point rate, 220th in three-point percentage. That's where Pitt excels. They're 27th in defending the perimeter. Pitt can be had inside a little bit. For all that size they do have, they're not the most efficient team inside. But again, I just vastly think they have advantages over this NC State front court. Rest of the way, that height stuff shows up in rebounding, 48th to 239th. Pitt gets a ton of offensive boards, 78th in the country. On the glass, on the offensive end, Pitt forces a decent amount of turnovers. Not that NC State really has a problem with turnovers committed, but it's at least worth noting. So another road spot here where I think just getting points is a little bit questionable. I would make this closer to a pick 'em myself. All right, we'll go back to the Big East. Georgetown takes on Seton Hall. This is one we'll take a total. It basically comes down to pacing. Won't belabor this point. On the season, you have two extremely slow teams. Georgetown 237th in adjusted tempo. Seton Hall 298th. Both these teams have their issues scoring. You look at effective field goal percentage. Georgetown 244th, Seton Hall 206. So two teams outside the top 200, just effective scoring. And then what have they done lately? Love to just look at conference play. How do these teams change their style? They're both slower. Georgetown is 264th in adjusted tempo over the last 6 weeks. Seton Hall's 307th. I mean, under 141, only thing to really say. Tempo lines up, effective shooting lines up. Not much else to add. All right, we're going to get to a greasy section before we rapid fire. Georgia Southern takes on South Alabama. This is the bottom of the Sun Belt, so you're not looking at elite teams here by any means. But you're getting a lot of points with Georgia Southern against the South Alabama team who has almost identical efficiency metrics. They're pretty close. And the record, I think, is why you see this gap, 5-18 for Georgia Southern versus 10-13 for South Alabama. But to dive into the weeds here and why I think it's too many points, effective field goal percentage actually suits Georgia Southern, as crazy as that is. They're 182 in effective field goal. South Alabama's 232. I think there are advantages for Georgia Southern. And basically when you're taking dogs in these really bad conference games, like just do you have advantages? Do you have paths to covering your spread? And they do. They're 124th in effective height. South Alabama's 203. For what it's worth, they haven't used their effective height well, but it's at least worth noting. And then last, like this Georgia Southern team actually has decent shooters. They're 23rd in three-point rate, 84th in three-point percentage. South Alabama 160th in defending the three. I was very surprised to see this Georgia Southern team come in with so few wins, despite having a top 100 three-point percentage in the country. Just wild. They've run pretty bad in some games, but I mean, to dive into the individuals, like Tyron Moore, 42% from three. Deuce Dean, 36. Derek Harris, 36. Jamar Franklin, 37. Aaron Banks, 41%. There's a lot of edges that point Georgia Southern's direction. And then other thing I like to do with these teams, go to evanmead.com, just look up the players, see who's on the team, where do they rank in their conference. You can sort by conference, and it gives you a good basic performance metric to kind of just tell you how good are they. South Alabama has one player in the top 50. He ranks 49th. Georgia Southern, they have multiple players in the top 50. And biggest thing yet, Eugene Brown is back for this team. Premier transfer as far as this conference goes. He's an Ohio State player. He's the highest ranked player of either team. He's played a limited time this year due to injury, but he's back with the roster, back with Georgia Southern. I actually think you want to play this on the money line. There's at least a case to be made for it. I prefer the +5, but think that's at least an interesting angle. All right, now we're getting to the real fun stuff. Bucknell takes on Navy. And this is one where I think the wrong team is favored. I would rather take Bucknell, and I'm not really sure why this is the way it is. They're +1. They have an edge in offensive efficiency, 255, 319. Defense, 275 to 321. Rebounding, 227 to 283. They're healthy. I actually went and dove into all the injuries. Like everyone on this team who's expected to play should be out there. The only player who's missing is Josh Bosco, but he's been bad. Bucknell has dealt with injuries, but they're all back. You look at just overall personnel. Navy has 1 player in the top 40. Bucknell is 6. Top 20. Obviously, Navy doesn't have any. Bucknell is 2. Some of the stylistics and shooting stuff, like effective field goal percentage, just vastly in favor of Bucknell, 172 to 356. 3-point percentage, 120 to 341. Effective height, 54 to 361. Like, what are we doing here? The wrong team is favored. Just flat out, point blank, period. Bucknell should be favored. Last game we'll dive into with full breakdowns before we go to the rapid fire section. High Point takes on Ashville, and this is an awesome game. Right away, this is probably the preview of who wins this conference and makes it to March Madness. So you like mid-majors, you want to get an edge on the competition for some of the schools that might pull off an upset. Watch this game. They're 2 awesome teams. High Point, if I'm not mistaken, is the longest win streak in the country. But I did take Asheville +3. This is another important one to shop. But Asheville, they've gotten clipped a couple times in games that were very close and they should have won. They have an elite player, the best player in this conference, Drew Pember. Basically, the efficiency metrics are very close. High Point has an offensive edge, 37 to 127. But Asheville has a defensive edge, 209 to 281. Rebounding does suit High Point, but I think there's a little bit of noise in this. You look at effective height, Asheville actually has a taller lineup. 73 to 137 in effective height. Both these teams pretty solid with the turnover margin and foul margin. They both generate a ton of fouls. Sometimes they get in foul trouble themselves, but this is going to be a fast, up-tempo game with a lot of efficiency on offense. And we talked about the gap in overall offensive efficiency. Effective field goal percentage is even tighter. 81 for High Point, 111 for Asheville. So it's very close for these two teams. I personally think it should be a pick'em. High Point, if they played on a neutral court, should be a slight favorite, but this is in Asheville. So +3, I think, is a value, but it's one that's pretty close in my opinion. All right, let's go through a couple throwaways before the end of the show. I did take an over in Auburn, Alabama at 163. I think it's pretty close. I took an over in Louisville, Syracuse. For as bad as Louisville is, they're still playing extremely fast. 153.5 is what I got there. I'm interested in a couple unders, waiting on numbers. Creighton, Providence, currently at 143. Both those teams are slow and Providence can't score. So I'm interested there. Basically, for an over to hit, Creighton would have to do all the legwork on their own. Couple pacing spots. USC Upstate versus Longwood. That under at 139 is interesting. In my opinion, you just look at the pace of play for those two teams. Upstate 254th in tempo, Longwood 230th. The same number exists for Stetson versus Bellarmine. Their tempos are 279 and 328. So also interested in an under 139 in that contest. Otherwise, under an Old Dominion Southern Miss, a couple throwaways for this. That one, you have Old Dominion 74th, Southern Miss at 235, but effective shooting is so bad in that game. 265 for Old Dominion, 286 for other Southern Miss. So that's interesting. Otherwise, I took an over in Portland, Gonzaga. Portland plays fast, as bad as they are. That was at 159. Southern Illinois, Drake at +10 for Southern Illinois piqued my interest. Drake's very good. But as far as Southern Illinois goes, this team is 53rd in effective scoring. Drake's 37. And Southern Illinois actually has a pretty stark 3-point edge. They're 13th in the country in 3-point percentage. 3-point defense. Sorry, they're very good across the board. So they're 47th in 3-point percentage, 13th in 3-point defense. And they're not ceding a ton rebounding or height-wise. So, +10 is a lot for a team that shoots like this. I don't know. Southern Illinois also piqued my interest. But looking at my list, that's it for throwaways. Long show today, 1.5 hour. Thank you guys for watching. If you have any comments, leave them below. I would love to hear it. If you have any questions, reach out to me on Twitter. I'm at Matt_Gajewski. Happy to answer anything. Otherwise, good luck. We'll see you tomorrow.